I want to just, again, reiterate these 4 layers, all right, sometimes called 4 tunics, all right, 4 layers of the cross-sectional anatomy of the esophagus, of the stomach, small and large intestine. They all conform to this sort of 4-layer thing. Can I assume you all have the handout in hand? Everybody's got it? Okay, good. All right. So these 4 layers, beginning with the inside. Okay, the inside space, by the way, the hollow space, we call it the lumen. All right, that's the lumen. Anytime I refer to the luminal surface, I'm referring to the surface that's facing the lumen. All right, and the first surface, then, the first concentric layer or tunic is the mucosa. It includes an epithelium, which will change. Right? What's the epithelium going to be like in the esophagus? Take a guess. Right, stratified squamous. All right. Stratified squamous epithelium, non-keratinized, of course. All right. And when we get down into the intestine, we're going to look for a simple columnar, right? Simple columnar with microvilli on it. No? Okay. So the epithelium will change, but nevertheless, you'll have an epithelium, you'll have a lamina propria, and you'll have a little muscularis layer, a little thin wisp of muscle in the mucosa that's just for local activity. Local meaning right at the surface. It's not moving food down, peristaltically. It's just stirring the surface up a little bit. Okay, and then the next layer down is the submucosa, and the submucosa is where we'll have glands extending down, glands that are secreting up into the lumen with ducts passing through the mucosa. All right. You'll have blood vessels. You'll have a group of nerves there that are both sensory and motor. All right, called the submucosal plexus. All right, and then the next layer, the thickest of the layers. All right. In some respects, if you were to cut the gut and look at it, you'd probably only see this layer unless you really looked carefully. All right, it's the muscularis externa. Right? And the muscularis externa is 2 smooth muscle layers, always arrayed as inner circular, outer longitudinal. All right? And that's just say that enough in your head, you just always know. It's inner circular, outer longitudinal. There's a few other ducts that we'll get to later on where, like the ureter or something, where it's reversed. All right? But in the digestive tract, it's always inner circular and outer longitudinal layers. And do you understand what that means? The smooth muscle fibers are running either longwise or they're forming a ring around the gut. All right. And this is what's responsible for peristaltic movement in the esophagus or segmentation in the intestine. All right. The 4th layer is called a serosa, except when it's not. All right. The 4th layer is the outer covering. And if we're looking at most of the small intestine and all of the large intestine except at the tail end, at the rectum, the aim is to have a serous membrane covering this tube, all right, to allow the different parts of the gut to slide past one another, right? That's what a serosa is. It's simply a serous membrane covering, all right? It is synonymous with the visceral peritoneum, right? If we go back to the very most basic anatomy I've drawn for you, where I said your body is a tube within a tube, right? This is your somatic body wall, and this is your gut, right? And what did I draw here? That, right? And we said this is parietal peritoneum, a serous membrane that forms the inner lining of the body cavity, right? This is the body cavity here. And this is the visceral peritoneum, all right? Serous membrane that covers the surface of the digestive tract. And then this is the thin membrane that descends down as 2 layers of serous membrane All right. I feel like a yoga guy. Oh, yeah. Yeah. All right. Descending down 2 layers, all right, and that forms the mesentery. That's the mesentery, all right? What is the mesentery doing in my drawing here? Go ahead, Christina. What's the mesentery doing here? It's supporting the gut, all right? I want you to think of this in 3 dimensions, not 2. It's not just a flat thing with lines. This is a tube coming out of the board. All right, so what is this right here? This is a sheet of serous membrane, a double sheet of serous membrane, isn't it? And the gut is slung from that, right? It's a sling that's holding the gut, isn't it? Now, it isn't holding it because you're not laying on your belly hanging in the, like this, right? You're not hanging. But its purpose throughout the digestive tract then is what? It's to prevent the gut. If the gut was just a tube sitting in the body cavity with no supporting structures, it would get all tangled, wouldn't it? And in fact, that still happens in horses sometimes. Who knows about that? Huh? Torsion, when a horse gets, or it happens in dogs as well once in a while. All right? And with horses, if they don't get it soon enough, you have to kill the horse. All right? You have to put the horse down because the horse is in excruciating pain because the gut has got a twist and it's ischemic. It's not getting any blood flow, and it's incredibly painful for the animal, and better to just shoot him in the head. All right. Sorry. All right. Dogs, when they find that out, and big dogs seem to have this problem, they can open them up and they can flip it around, all right? But its purpose, the purpose of the mesentery, is to prevent that from happening, and it does a pretty good job of it, all right? It also provides a support for blood vessels that are running down from the dorsal body wall. So to add a little bit to our illustration here, here's the aorta, all right, the descending aorta, and it sends off branches, doesn't it? All right, and the important ones for us are the superior and inferior mesenterics, and those arteries are going to travel in that space as they reach out to supply the digestive tract, okay? And so this is holding blood vessels as well, all right? And if we were to look at the intestine as a big coil of intestine, all right? There it is, all right? Some of you know what I'm about to draw. Here's this blood vessel coming in, and it does what? It sends out its branches, doesn't it? Who's observed this in the lab? We just dissected rats this afternoon in Major's biology, and we saw this, all right? And this whole thing is traveling in that sheet of mesentery, all right? There's a big sheet running here, all right, holding those blood vessels. It looks like a piece of saran wrap on either side of the blood vessels, all right? And that's holding those blood vessels, and then it goes around the gut to form the visceral peritoneum, okay? All right, and so what's it doing? It's preventing those blood vessels from getting all tangled and so forth. It's supporting them. And that membrane is coming down from the dorsal midline. So, from the dorsal midline. Good? Shelley? The sling itself is the mesentery? No, yes, this part of it is the mesentery. The part that drops down. This part that's going to fill in this space here, that's the mesentery. All right? And then here it's serous membrane or visceral peritoneum, and here it's parietal peritoneum. It's all serous membrane. It's all exactly the same stuff. It's just based on its location. All right? Yes?
It's all serous membrane.
It's all serous membrane. It just depends on its location, except when you don't have serous membrane. All right? Like in the esophagus, you don't have a serosa. That fourth layer doesn't exist in the esophagus because I don't want my esophagus sliding around back there behind the trachea, do I? I want it held in position, right? And so I have instead a fibrosa, which is just some loose connective tissue, loose connective tissue, cottony, to hold it in place, all right? We call that a fibrosa or an adventitia. An adventitia. Okay? So, all right. So, we've just talked about it now, and we're going to say a little bit more now about the peritoneum and the mesenteries, all right? And before we do that, I want you to think about that very irregular statue that you got for your loved one, all right? And you couldn't find a good box for it, so you decided to just wrap it, even though it's a big, weird, funny shape, isn't it? Right? So you take a... do you know what I'm talking about? No. It's all right. Keep listening. All right? And we're going to take a big piece of wrapping paper, and we're going to try to wrap that big, irregular thing, right? And as we do that, we're going to end up with like some folds of paper that we're just going to have to, just big folds, and we're going to have to fold those down over it because, as they went around curved surfaces and stuff. Got it? Yeah. That's what we're about to do right now. All right? We're going to wrap the digestive organs, all right, with mesentery, or with the peritoneal membrane, all right? And we're going to have big extensions of mesentery, right? Mesentery is any time it isn't around the organ or on the body wall, it's mesentery, right? We're going to have big folds of mesentery that are sort of extra because of the irregular shape of things, all right? And so, as we look at the body in this sort of cross-sectional view here, all right, here in green, anytime you have, again, serous membrane dropping down off the dorsal body wall, coming out and investing an organ. So if we look at where my pointer is here, all right, this is mesentery here in green, right? In blue out here, that is visceral peritoneum, isn't it? All right? And so you can see all of the pieces of mesentery coming out, supporting the gut at its various stages here, all right? But in some instances, you have, for example, a covering of serous membrane over the liver, and then you have this connection between the liver and eventually the stomach. That's called the lesser omentum, all right? And it connects the lesser curvature of the stomach. Do you know what that is when I say the lesser curvature? You think about what the stomach looks like, right? This is the lesser curvature, and this is the greater curvature, right? And so the lesser curvature is attached to the liver by the lesser omentum, all right? And this is where I was going with my example of gift wrapping, all right? Look at this right here, all right? I've got this fold that comes down off of the greater curvature of the stomach, all right, and then comes back up to meet the transverse colon here, all right? And it's just a big fold, all right? It's just serous membrane that goes down and comes back up again and forms almost like an apron, all right, in front of the abdominal organs. And it's just an extra fold of mesentery. But it's called the greater omentum, all right? The greater omentum. And it usually fills with fat, okay? And it has a lot of white blood cells in it. And some people say that if there's ever a breach in the wall of the intestine, it's sort of a containment system. I'm not convinced of that fact. It may just be some sloppy anatomy, all right? But if you were to open up the body wall, there you see the greater omentum there, all right, draping downward like an apron, sitting in front of all of the parts of the small intestine here that's all coiled up, right? You'd have to literally fold that back to be able to see the intestine, all right? Now, we use this term mesentery whenever we have a fold of serous membrane coming out from the dorsal body wall and investing the organ, all right? Unless it's investing part of the colon, all right? And if it's investing part of the colon, all right, we call it a mesocolon, all right? So if I go to this next figure, all right, mesentery is the two layers of serous membrane traveling out to invest the small intestine and support it and support the blood vessels traveling to it, all right? And by the same token, if this were a part of the large intestine, namely the transverse colon, or the sigmoid colon. We don't call it mesentery. Instead, we call it mesocolon. All right? Do not get overwhelmed by that. How easy is that? All I'm saying is mesentery that goes to small intestine is called mesentery. And mesentery that goes to a few parts of the large intestine is called mesocolon, period. All right? That's all there is to it. You guys don't turn it into more than that. And the parts of the large intestine that have a mesocolon is the transverse and the sigmoid. All right? Now, before we leave this, you can see here, for example, that certain things, all right, like the rectum, or if this were lateral, like the ascending and descending colon, sit behind the peritoneum. They're not in the body cavity enough that you formed a mesentery that came away from the body wall and went around them. They sit so far back, all right, or their position is such that you can't get a membrane all the way around them. And so they are not considered to be intraperitoneal, all right? They're instead referred to as being retroperitoneal. So anytime something isn't centered enough, well, let's just do it here, all right? This gut is intraperitoneal. It is hanging by mesentery, all right? But here's a kidney, and here's the other kidney, if we go to that part of the body on cross-section. And, oh yeah, there's serous membrane, but it's only covering one side of it, all right? This is not floating in the body cavity, is it? It's sitting along the body wall. That is retroperitoneal. All right? And retroperitoneal structures of the digestive system include the duodenum, the pancreas, the ascending and descending colon, and the rectum. All right? So all of those are referred to as being retroperitoneal. Again, the duodenum, or most of the duodenum, the pancreas, the ascending and descending colon, and the rectum. Okay? So a lot of making a big deal out of a lot of membranes, all right? And if you had to go back and say, so what? What's the function of that, of all that serous membrane stuff? You can name a couple of things, right? You can say it allows the parts of the gut to move past one another easily, and why does that have to happen? Think about if there's food in there, right? The dimensions of the gut are constantly changing, all right? And it allows things to shift and move, all right, out of the way very nicely, number one. And number two, it prevents torsion or entanglement or twisting of the bowel, right, of the gut. And it also provides a support for the blood vessels and nerves and lymphatics that are running out to supply the digestive tract. All right? So it keeps those nice and ordered. Otherwise, can you imagine just having blood vessels just simply traversing across the volume of the body cavity, and then you go for a run, all right, and you've got this nice, delicate little blood vessel, and it's, hanging on to the gut as the gut's bouncing around, all right? Can you imagine that? So here you have a nice way of supporting those vessels, okay? Say again. Okay, so we were out for a run, all right? And you start feeling that little stitch there, and you're going, what is that? All right? You've got serous membrane on the body wall, the parietal peritoneum. You've got serous membrane on the intestine, visceral peritoneum. And they're sliding past one another, and eventually you might get a dry spot. And what happens now? It sticks, it sticks, it sticks. And guess what? What do you know about sensory on the carcass? I've mentioned this to you before, I know. Sensory of the carcass. What do you know about sensory in the carcass? You feel that?
Yeah.
How? Was that sharp?
Yeah.
Where did I stick you?
Right there.
Where? Can you show me exactly?
Right there.
Right there. You can. That's sensory on the carcass. All right. Sharp pain. You can localize it. It hurts, doesn't it? Yeah. Okay. All right. All right. Sensory in the viscera is dull pain. You can't put your finger on it. All right. All right. It's dull pain. All right. It's when you have cramps. Not that it doesn't hurt. Whatever. I'm not going there. But can you put your finger on it in a precise way? It's diffuse. All right. Okay. So, what was that stitch like? It was sharp pain because it's the body wall. All right. So the nerves that are sensory to the carcass are different from the sensory nerves of the viscera. Okay, and we'll get to that later in the course, but now you have a good example. All right, let's get into the mouth here real quick. This is all just sort of descriptive anatomy, and I don't want to take a lot of time in it. It's mostly a lot of vocabulary, really, right? You know what your cheeks are and your lips, all right, and the space in between your cheeks and your lips. This space in here is called the vestibule, all right, and the gums or the gingiva, okay? The labial frenulum, you can have one or two or three of lesser frenulum, is that little thin connection at the top in the dead center and the bottom dead center, and some people have some bilaterally as well. All right, that's called a frenulum. All right, it's a little delicate part of the mucosal layer there. All right, that is holding your lip from, flapping around some or whatever. I don't know. You don't need a frenulum really, but it's there. All right, you recognize that it's there. All right, you have your hard palate, which is what? Made up of the part of the maxilla and the palatine bone. And behind that is the soft palate. And the soft palate has that little dangling down uvula. All right? And when you go to swallow, one of the first things that happens is that soft palate goes up and presses against the oropharynx, right, to seal off and prevent anything from regurgitating back up into the nasopharynx, right? Okay, and so that forms a seal against the back wall of the pharynx, okay? All right, that's the soft palate doing that. All right, your tongue, you have a lingual frenulum, right, under your tongue, the little membrane that holds your tongue down to the floor of your mouth, all right? And the tongue is also anchored way back to the hyoid bone, to this bone that you have right here that you can feel if you go to the corners of your throat here, all right, you can feel that, and your tongue is anchored there, all right, and of course your tongue has all kinds of important functions, right? What kind of muscle is your tongue? Skeletal. See how voluntary that was? All right, yeah. All right, so the tongue is voluntary, skeletal muscle, right? Skeletal muscle, and it's a bunch of fibers running in all different directions. All right, bundles, fascicles of skeletal muscle running. Oh, I saw it. Don't stick your tongue out at me. All right, who can roll their tongue? Who can't? Who can't roll their tongue? Put your hands up. Okay, you know what? That feels so good, and you will never know what that feels like. Okay, all right. And that's just because some of us were born more talented. We have fascicles of muscle running crosswise, and therefore we're able to do this, whereas the rest of you are just able to stick your tongue out and suck it back in again. That's about it. All right? And your tongue, it moves in all directions, which of course allows you to manipulate the food so that you're moving it in and putting it between the jaws of death, putting it between your teeth and so forth. It allows you to push that food back, all right, to begin the swallowing reflex. It's also important, of course, in taste, all right. You have taste buds on the surface of your tongue, and it's also important in speech, right? As you know, you move your tongue around to create different sounds and so forth. Okay. All right, dentition. You've got how many teeth? 32. And more of them on the top or more of them on the bottom? Same number. I was just messing with you. All right, 16 up, 16 down. And you know what the beautiful thing is, all right, is that for every particular type of tooth, whether it's a molar or a cuspid or an incisor, you have exactly the same number up top as you do down below. So that makes it's easier than it should be. It should have been complicated. All right, it's not. as mammals, you have different shaped teeth, all right? Fish don't have different shaped teeth. Amphibians don't have different shaped teeth, all right? Birds don't have teeth, all right? But as mammals, you have different shaped teeth, and they are incisors, these sharp-edged chisels, all right? You've got 4 up and 4 down, all right? Canines, 1, 2, 3, 4, all right? 2 up, 2 down, all right? Premolars, 2, 4, 6, 8, all right? And then molars, 3, 6, 9, 12, all right? So that's it, all right? Now, when we started cooking our meat, our ancestors 50,000 years ago, all right, we realized that, you know what, if you cook it, you can actually chew it less and swallow it more easily, all right? And so, guess what? Our jaw became smaller, all right? Our brain became bigger because we were eating protein and getting a lot of nutrition that we weren't getting before, and having that third set of molars back there, right? 3, 6, 9, 12. Having 3 was too many to fit on your jaw, all right? So now that back set you call your wisdom teeth. I don't know where that name comes from, actually. That's an interesting question. I don't know who named them that, for what reason they named them. But most of you have them removed, right? Who had their wisdom teeth removed, all right? And who only had 2 wisdom teeth, period. All right, there you go. And who didn't have any wisdom teeth? And you are so much more highly evolved than the rest of us, all right, where we are still like our ancestors. So congrats to that. Okay. All right. So here you see the structure of a tooth, and I'm not going to belabor the tooth structure to you more than to recognize the crown, that part of the tooth that sits above the gum line, all right, and the neck of the tooth, that portion that transcends through the gums themselves, and then the root of the tooth is that part that's anchored by those ligaments, by those periodontal ligaments, to the adjacent bone, all right? So here's all this bone here, and the tooth is anchored there. So there's the root, the neck, and the crown, all right? Enamel covers the crown of the tooth, or forms the crown of the tooth. And of course, enamel is the hardest material made in nature. Remember I told you about neural crest cells? Yeah? Neural crest cells give rise to the cells that make enamel, all right, which is, again, a component only found in vertebrates, in creatures with a backbone, all right? And that's what made creatures with backbones so much more powerful than creatures without backbones, right? Having this very hard material on their teeth, all right? Or having teeth altogether, which teeth only are there because you have enamel on them. All right. All right, if we look inside the tooth, we have the pulp cavity here, which carries all the blood vessels and nerves and so forth. Outer to that, you have the dentin, all right, which is proteinaceous material, all right, and mineralized, all right, proteinaceous and mineralized. And then what else do we have here? The dentin and the cementum. You see here, as we have the connection, all right, between those, the surface of the tooth, the periodontal ligaments, all right, attaching to the surface of the tooth, attaching to the cementum, all right. The gingiva, of course, is the gums, all right, and we've already talked about the periodontal ligament and the bone that into which the teeth rest, and then the gingival sulcus is the groove here at the edge of the teeth, all right, along the sides of the teeth. And when you go to your dental hygienist and they poke the little probe down into their gingival sulcus, they want to see, have you been flossing, taking care of your teeth. This figure, I don't care about this, all right. This is, if you go to the dentist, you know that they sit there and we've got some problems on number 13, all right, and there's just a convention for numbering your teeth, starting it on the upper case of teeth on the right side, numbering around to 16, then going to the lower case and going around the other way. All right, and of course, if you're a dentist or a hygienist, having numbers is nice because you don't confuse what was on the right side with the left. All right, and you don't need to know that. All right, okay, let's get on. Salivary glands. All right, salivary glands are the first accessory organ of digestion, meaning they're not part of the tube itself. Instead, they are a gland that is secreting into the lumen. All right, you have 3 pairs of salivary glands. All right. The first pair are up here. They're called your parotid glands. If you go just in front of your ear and down below your zygomatic here, all right, into the soft tissue and press really hard, all right. Oh, ow! Don't press hard. All right, that can hurt. Not going to do it. You've had enough pain for one night. Okay. All right, but this is dull pain. It's dull pain because these are organs in here. Right? And does it feel like dull pain? Yeah, it's dull pain. All right. So those are your parotid glands. All right. In addition, you have submandibular glands. All right, sitting. Here you go, way down deep in below your tongue, and glands that sit very close to but beneath your tongue called the sublingual glands. All right. And in terms of the amount of product that they're producing, 25 to 30% of the saliva comes from the parotid glands. The majority comes from your submandibular glands. And then you have sublingual glands producing a small amount. All of these gland systems have ducts, all right? So the parotid glands actually have ducts that drain into the vestibule, all right, adjacent to your upper case of teeth, all right, up here, all right? The sublingual glands are draining right alongside your frenulum, all right, of your tongue. And you can look in the mirror and you can actually see the openings of those ducts. Who's ever seen that before? All right, and some of you guys can actually, do squirty things, yeah. And yeah, how do you know that? Foreigner. All right, so, all right. Yeah. So when we look at the secretions of these glands, all right, we see different proportions of serous fluid, which is protein-rich fluid, versus mucus, all right? And the protein-rich fluid is fluid that contains enzymes. That's the protein, all right, which gives it serous qualities, slippery, all right, less viscous, all right? The parotid glands produce more of the serous kind of fluid than they do of the mucus fluid, all right? And the other glands sort of the opposite, all right? And so you have different proportions of serous secreting cells versus mucus secreting cells in each of the different glands, all right? As I say, parotid, it's only serous, okay? So it's very liquid. The enzymes themselves, lysozyme is an enzyme that breaks down the cell wall of bacteria. So what's it doing for you? It's an antimicrobial agent in your saliva. All right. In addition, you might have antibodies in your saliva as well. All right. Again, antimicrobial. All right. And you're going to have an enzyme called salivary amylase. All right, which breaks down starch. So what's happening in the mouth in terms of digesting your food? You're mechanically digesting it, breaking into smaller pieces through mechanical work, crushing it with your teeth and so forth, chopping it up to make it easier to swallow. And you're beginning the chemical part of digestion by the action of salivary amylase breaking down starch. All right, that's just breaking down a carbohydrate. All right, polysaccharide, a carbohydrate. Are you breaking down proteins in your mouth? No. Are you breaking down fats in your mouth? No. All right, that's got to wait till downstream in the gut. So you do a little bit of digestion here in the mouth, all right, and when that enzyme gets down in your stomach, it's inactivated. So you begin a little digestion there, all right. And these secretions are stimulated by cranial nerves, and I'm not going to worry you about the 7th or 9th cranial nerve right now. Let's not worry about that, okay. All right, other questions? We got it for the salivary glands? Merocrine secretion. All right? Yeah, American secretion. Yeah. So the parotid gland is all serous. All right? And the others, you're going to see a mix of cells in there. And as I say, mucus-secreting cells secrete mucin. When mucin mixes with water, it becomes mucus. All right? And so that's the product of the mucus cells in these glands. All right. The esophagus. All right. Ladies, never forget, the way to a man's stomach is through his esophagus. All right? I don't know. Ba-dum-bum. There you go. Okay. So esophagus is what? It's the tube that conveys food from the mouth, all right, or from your oropharynx. No, from the bottom of your laryngopharynx, right? That's where the esophagus begins, right? At the very bottom of the laryngopharynx, all the way down to your stomach. 10 inches long, muscular tube, follows our perfect cross-section that we said earlier, right? A mucosa with a lining of stratified squamous non-keratinized epithelium, all right? And then a submucosa with some mucus glands in it. And then the muscularis externa, the third layer, and the upper third is skeletal muscle. And in the lower third is smooth muscle. And in between, it's a mix. It's transitional, all right? And the idea is that the upper third you have control over, all right? So you're able to control what's happening, and then it just takes over as a smooth muscle action, all right? And as those muscles contract, all right, they serve to move the food down to the stomach by that process of peristalsis, forming a ring of contraction that moves the food down the esophagus, all right? You have two sphincters, all right? An upper esophageal sphincter at the upper end. And what is a sphincter? It's just an extra thick ring of muscle that can close off and prevent flow. All right? So at the top end, you've got the upper esophageal sphincter. And at the lower end, the bottom, just as it enters into the stomach, you have the lower esophageal sphincter. All right? And these are always closed except when they're not. All right? Except if there's food being presented. And then they open. All right? If there's food being presented, they open. All right? That was your question? As I said, skeletal muscle up top, smooth muscle down below, transitional in the middle, meaning a mix in the middle. Okay? So swallowing is not gravity. All right? Swallowing is not gravity at work. Swallowing is muscular work, all right, as you're going to see. And food is delivered then from the mouth. You have the voluntary phase of the swallowing reflex, which is basically moving the food around, chewing it, mixing it with saliva, forming it into a bolus, right? Forming it into an appropriately sized wad of food that is now stuck together. Part of the function of the mucus produced by your salivary glands is to form a nice bolus, all right, a nice ball of food. And in the voluntary phase, then the tongue moves it back into the oropharynx. Okay? When it presents to the oropharynx, the walls of the oropharynx are skeletal muscle, and they begin to help to move that food, all right, through a reflex, right? And remember, skeletal muscle is actuated either voluntarily or by reflex. So as soon as food is presented, all right, by the voluntary phase to the oropharynx, the pharyngeal muscles there begin to move it down, and they raise the larynx. And as they raise the larynx, what happens? The glottis meets the epiglottis, right? And you close off the airway, all right? Right? When you swallow, the larynx goes up to meet the epiglottis, all right? Puts the lid on it so you don't take that food down into your lungs, all right? Also, the soft palate, right, goes up to meet the nasopharynx to prevent food from going upwards, right? So you seal that off, all right? And then finally, the food then is delivered into the esophagus, and in the esophagus, we've said, you have peristalsis, a ring of muscle moving downwards, all right? And when I was in college, there was a guy at a pub called the Fox Inn on Santa Monica Boulevard in Los Angeles who could drink a pitcher of beer standing on his head. All right? There's something to aspire for, all right? And what does that tell you about the role of the esophagus? It's not relying on gravity, is it? All right? It is conveying the food downwards, all right? But you could just as easily be standing on your food, on your stomach, standing on your food, standing on your stomach, standing on your head, and getting food down into your stomach, all right? Because it's muscular action, a ring of muscle carrying that food, pressing it down into the stomach, all right? So that's the esophagus, all right? It is always closed. It is never patent like the trachea is, right? It's always flattened, and it's only not flattened when there's actually food in it, all right, which it is distending for, all right? And when that food gets to the bottom, to the lower esophageal sphincter, it opens up, and there you go. So we have that ring of muscle now pushing that food downwards, all right, as you have the contraction of the two layers of intercircular and outer longitudinal, all right, whether it's skeletal muscle or a mix or smooth muscle, you're going to push that food down, and then down here, the lower esophageal sphincter will open, all right, to allow the food to enter into the stomach, okay? All right. Yes?
So the esophagus is just muscle. There's no cartilage or any...
That's right. There's nothing, no hard structures, all right? But it's the four layers, right? Mm-hmm. Mucosa, submucosa, muscularis externa, and fibrosa. Right? What I tell you a minute ago, you don't want the esophagus flapping around back there.